Ethan sat in the small, dimly lit control room, staring at the holographic screen in front of him. His eyes scanned over the various incoming messages and reports from the outer sectors of the galaxy. The space station he was assigned to had been quiet for days, and the usual routine had become almost monotonous. Ethan was a soldier, stationed at the edge of known space, tasked with keeping everything secure while the scientists, engineers, and diplomats worked on more important things. He didn't mind it most days, but sometimes the silence felt too heavy. Today, however, was different. A cargo ship had arrived from a distant planet, carrying a diplomatic envoy and several crates of valuable goods. It wasn't an unusual event, but what made this one stand out was the unexpected arrival of an alien female. The ship's manifest mentioned a new species never seen before, and it was Ethan's job to oversee the quarantine protocols. The first time Ethan laid eyes on Kale, he couldn't help but be struck by her appearance. She was tall and slender, with smooth, iridescent skin that shimmered in the light. Her eyes, large and bright, looked almost human, but with a strange, otherworldly glow. Her features were delicate, yet there was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself. She was unlike any species Ethan had ever encountered. At first, the quarantine process went smoothly. Kale was brought into a secure holding room, as per protocol, to ensure she posed no risk to the station's crew. Ethan was just about to move on to other duties when a sudden alarm blared throughout the station. "Warning! Quarantine breach. Lockdown initiated. All personnel report to your stations." Ethan's heart raced. A breach in the quarantine room could mean the station's safety was at risk. He quickly grabbed his communication device and rushed to the quarantine zone, his boots echoing in the empty hallway. By the time he arrived, the situation had already escalated. The containment door to the quarantine room had malfunctioned, locking both Kale and Ethan inside. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, his voice sharp with urgency as he approached the containment door. The lights inside the room flickered, and he could just make out Kale's silhouette standing by the far wall, her arms crossed. "I don't know." Kale's voice was calm but tinged with frustration. "The door just shut and locked." "I didn't do anything," Ethan cursed under his breath. He pressed a few buttons on the control panel, trying to override the door's locking mechanism. But it was no use. The station's AI was clearly blocking access from the outside. "We're stuck in here," Ethan muttered, trying to keep his cool. "But looks like it's a quarantine lockdown for both of us." Kale didn't respond right away. She merely glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. Ethan could tell she was studying him, just as he was doing with her. There was something about her presence that felt unsettling. Maybe it was her alien nature, or maybe it was the strange energy in the air that had suddenly become thick with tension. He didn't know. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the station's hum, usually comforting, now felt oppressive. They were alone in the small, sterile room, with only the occasional flicker of the lights to break the silence. Ethan took a step back and exhaled. "I don't know how long we'll be stuck in here. We need to figure out how to communicate with the outside. The last thing we want is to be labeled a threat." Kale raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm the threat?" Ethan turned to her, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "No. I'm just saying that if the station's AI perceives a threat, it could escalate quickly. We need to stay calm and figure this out." Kale didn't respond immediately, but she walked over to one of the walls and placed her hand against the cold surface, her fingers glowing faintly. Ethan watched in confusion. He'd read about the advanced technology of Kale's species, but he hadn't seen anything like this firsthand. Was she trying to communicate with the ship's systems? Was she trying to unlock the door herself? "I can try to hack into the system," Kale said, turning her head toward him. "But it might take some time. My species has a different kind of technology. It may not be compatible with your station's AI." Ethan nodded. "Do what you can. In the meantime, I'll try to get through to the control room. Let's hope they haven't locked down everything." He stepped back toward the communication panel, trying again to get a signal. Nothing. The AI had completely cut them off from the outside world. Great, Ethan muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. He took a few steps toward the room's small window and stared out into the void of space, the endless blackness feeling oddly comforting now that he was cut off from everything. He turned back to Kale, who was still concentrating on her glowing hand pressed against the wall. "You're from a planet called Vareka, right?" Ethan asked, trying to make conversation as the minutes dragged on. Kale nodded without looking up. "Yes. My people are from a highly militarized world, and we've been at war for centuries. We've learned to survive through technology, adaptation, and strength. That's why I was sent here, to discuss possible alliances with your people." But she paused, her eyes glinting with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "Things didn't go as planned, it seems." Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "It's a lot for anyone to deal with. A long journey through space, a new world, new customs. I get it." Kale didn't respond, but Ethan could feel her eyes on him. There was a lot she wasn't saying, but he couldn't push her for more. Right now, they had a bigger problem. The station was in lockdown, and they were trapped together in this small room. "How much longer do you think it'll take?" Ethan asked, returning to the window, his fingers tapping nervously on the cold glass. Kale finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I don't know. It could be hours. It could be longer. But I'll get us out. You just need to be patient." Ethan nodded again, though he wasn't sure if he fully believed her. He had learned over the years that trust was earned, not given freely. And right now, Kale was still a stranger to him, no matter how much she claimed to want peace. As the minutes stretched into hours, the silence between them began to feel less oppressive and more natural. They had little choice but to coexist in this tiny space, and slowly, the tension between them began to ease. Hael eventually moved away from the wall and sat down on one of the room's metal benches. She closed her eyes, her breathing steady and calm. Ethan sat down across from her, watching her for a moment, before letting out a long sigh. "This is ridiculous," he said, shaking his head. "We're stuck in here, and we don't even know what caused the lockdown." The AI might have its reasons, but it's hard to trust something you can't see. Kale's eyes flicked open, and for the first time, there was something softer in her gaze. "You're right. The AI is a mystery to us as well, but I've learned over the years that sometimes you have to trust the unknown. The future isn't always clear, but we move forward anyway." Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her words. "That sounds like something a warrior would say." Kale smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. "I am a warrior in my own way." They fell into a comfortable silence after that, neither one speaking, but both lost in their own thoughts. The seconds turned into minutes, the minutes into hours. There was nothing left to do but wait. The hours stretched on like an endless void. The humming sound of the space station seemed louder now, more unsettling. Ethan sat in the corner, his legs stretched out before him. The walls of the small quarantine room were beginning to close in on him. He could feel the silence pressing on his chest, as though it was suffocating him. Every so often he would glance over at Kale, who was still sitting cross-legged on the other side of the room. Her eyes were closed, but her breathing was steady, calm. Ethan couldn't help but wonder about her. She was an enigma. There was so much he didn't know about her species, her world, her experiences. But he couldn't just ask. He had always been trained to be cautious around unknowns, especially alien species. The memories of past encounters with other races that had ended in violence or betrayal loomed in his mind, making him hesitant to trust her fully. Still, there was something about Kale that kept him intrigued. Despite being locked in this small room together, she didn't seem afraid. In fact, she almost seemed at peace. How could she stay so calm in the face of uncertainty? Ethan, on the other hand, was growing restless. The longer they stayed in the quarantine room, the more his patience wore thin. "I've been thinking," Ethan said after a long silence breaking the stillness between them. "If this station's AI thinks we're a threat, it might not let us out anytime soon." Kale opened her eyes slowly and met his gaze. There was no fear in her eyes, only the calm certainty of someone who had faced far worse than a simple lockdown.
"I know," she said softly.
"But you're wrong about one thing. The AI doesn't think we're a threat. It simply follows its programming. And right now, the programming is malfunctioning. This lockdown is an error. Once I can access the system, we'll be out in no time." Ethan frowned. "You really think it's that simple? You're not from around here. How do you know you can even access the station's system? I mean, this place is a fortress. Its security is top-notch." Kale's lips curled into a small smile, but there was no arrogance in her expression, only quiet confidence. "I've dealt with worse systems. My species has been fighting wars and developing technology for centuries. Our tech is different. I can work with it. It just takes time." Ethan wasn't convinced, but he had no better ideas. He stood up and paced across the room, trying to stretch his legs. The small space made it hard to think, to focus. Every time he tried to think of a way out, the walls seemed to close in even tighter. "You've been through wars," Ethan said, suddenly curious. "You said your species has fought for centuries. What's it like? Is it like Earth's wars? Or something different?" Kale's eyes softened at the question. She hesitated, clearly weighing whether or not to share her story. For a moment, she didn't answer, and Ethan wondered if he had overstepped. But then, she spoke. "It's different," Kale said quietly. "We fight for survival, not for power or land. My species, the Verika, has been torn apart by conflict for generations. We don't have the luxury of peace, of sitting back and letting others solve our problems. We fight because it's the only way to stay alive. It's not like the wars you have on Earth, where there are lines drawn between enemies and allies. For us, everything is a battle for resources, for control, for the future of our people." Ethan listened carefully, his mind racing. He had heard about the Vereka, of course. Every soldier had. They were a mysterious, powerful species, with a reputation for being fierce and relentless in battle. But hearing it from Kale, with such raw honesty, gave him a new perspective. She wasn't just some alien he had to monitor. She was a survivor. She had lived through things that Ethan couldn't even begin to imagine. "And you," Kale continued, her voice steady. "What's it like to be a soldier from Earth? You've fought in wars, I assume? What motivates you to keep fighting?" Ethan paused, taken aback by the question. He had never really stopped to think about it. Why did he fight? Why had he chosen this life? "It's complicated," he said after a long moment. "I joined the military to get away from home. I wasn't much of a student, and my family didn't have much. So, the army was my way out. I guess I wanted to prove something. To myself, maybe. And now I'm here, on this station, doing the same thing every day, keeping things secure. Woo. Keeping people safe. But sometimes I wonder if it's enough. If it really matters." Kale didn't say anything right away. Instead, she simply looked at him, with a strange kind of understanding, as if she could see through the walls he had built around himself. "It's not always about the fight, is it?" she said quietly. "It's about survival, and sometimes survival is all that matters." Ethan couldn't help but agree. It was true. The fight for survival, a constant struggle to stay alive, to protect what mattered, was something they both shared. No matter how different their worlds were, that one thing united them. It was a connection that neither of them had expected, but it was there, growing between them in the quiet moments. As the hours passed, Ethan found himself growing more comfortable around Kale. The initial tension the unease, slowly faded into something that felt more like companionship than anything else. They were stuck in this small room together, yes, but they were no longer strangers. They were two survivors, each with their own scars and stories. Eventually, KL stood up and moved toward the small console near the corner of the room. She pressed a few buttons, her fingers glowing faintly with light as she worked. Ethan watched her closely, trying to understand what she was doing. He had no idea how her technology worked, but he could see the concentration in her eyes. She was determined. She wasn't giving up. "How's it going?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice light, though he felt a small spark of hope. Maybe they weren't completely stuck after all.
"It's slow," Kale replied, not looking up. "The system is resistant, but I can bypass it."
"I'll get through. Just a little longer." Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure if he believed her. Still, he had no choice but to trust her. She was their best chance. "Thanks," he said quietly, sitting back down on the bench. Kyle glanced over at him, her expression unreadable. "We're in this together, whether we like it or not." Ethan smiled, though it was a little awkward. "Yeah, together." They fell into silence once again, but this time it wasn't as uncomfortable as before. The quiet wasn't oppressive. It was peaceful. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan allowed himself to relax. He still had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Time seemed to slow down as the minutes passed, and the tension in the small quarantine room grew thicker. Ethan watched as Kale continued to work on the console, her fingers moving with a purpose, tapping and swiping with precision. It was clear she was focused, but Ethan couldn't help but wonder how long it would take before they finally broke free of this lockdown. He had never been in a situation quite like this before, trapped in a room with an alien, relying on her to get them out. He had spent his life around humans, fighting side by side with his comrades in the military. But this was different. Kale wasn't human. She was from a faraway planet, a species so different from his own that he could hardly comprehend it. And yet, here they were, two strangers forced into the same space, trying to survive. Ethan ran a hand through his hair and stood up from the bench. He couldn't just sit there and wait. He needed to do something. He walked over to the small window and stared out at the vast emptiness of space. It was hard to believe how close they were to the edge of the galaxy. Beyond the station there was nothing but darkness, stretching out for what seemed like an eternity. For a moment the quiet and isolation of it all overwhelmed him. He was a soldier, but even soldiers had moments when they felt small, lost in the vastness of the universe. Kale's voice broke the silence. "It's done. The system's unlocked. The door should open now." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He turned around, his eyes wide with surprise. "Really?" Kale nodded, her expression unreadable. She stepped away from the console and gestured to the door. "Go ahead. Try it." Ethan walked over to the door, his fingers hovering over the control panel. He hesitated for a moment, but then he pressed the button. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and for the first time in hours, Ethan felt a surge of relief wash over him. He had been trapped, unsure of what was going on, but now there was a way out. He turned back to Kale, who was still standing near the console. Her calm demeanor never seemed to falter, even as they faced the unknown. Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for her. Without her, he would still be stuck in this small room, staring at the same four walls. "Thanks," he said, his voice sincere. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Kale gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "You would have found a way. You're resourceful. You wouldn't have given up." Ethan smiled, though it was a little shaky. "I'm not so sure about that." The two of them stood there for a moment, the door now wide open, offering a way out. But neither of them moved. It felt as though they were both waiting for something. Waiting for the right moment, or perhaps just waiting for the other to make the first move. Cale broke the silence again. We should get moving. The longer we stay here, the more we risk the station's systems failing again. We need to reach the control room, or at least find someone who can explain what's going on. Ethan nodded in agreement. Right,
Let's go.
they stepped into the corridor, the cold, metallic walls of the station surrounding them. The station was eerily quiet now, with no signs of life. The usual hum of machinery was absent, and the flickering lights cast long shadows down the hallway. It felt almost abandoned, as if something had gone wrong, something more than just the quarantine lockdown. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. Something wasn't right. They had been locked in that room for hours, but he had heard no announcements, no updates from the station's command. There were no emergency protocols in place. It was as if the station was being abandoned or ignored. Cale seemed to sense his unease. She glanced at him, her expression focused. Something's wrong, isn't it? Ethan met her gaze. Yeah.
It doesn't feel right. There's no communication from the station's command, and the systems have been acting strange.
This lockdown was too convenient, too sudden. Cale's eyes narrowed slightly.
You think it's sabotage?
I don't know, Ethan said, his voice low. But I don't like the way things are heading. The two of them continued down the darkened hallway, moving cautiously. The silence was oppressive, and every step seemed to echo too loudly. Ethan kept his hand near the weapon holstered at his side, just in case. He had learned long ago that it was better to be prepared, even if the threat wasn't clear. They reached an intersection in the hallway, and Cale motioned for them to stop.
We should take the maintenance route. It's less likely to be monitored, and we can avoid the main corridors.
Ethan agreed, and they turned down a narrow side passage. The maintenance tunnels were even darker than the main halls, but Cale seemed to know where she was going. Her movements were quick and efficient, as though she had been here before. As they moved deeper into the station, the sense of unease grew stronger. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone, that something, or someone, was watching them. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and he could almost hear the faint sound of footsteps echoing behind them. He glanced over his shoulder, but the passageway was empty. It was probably just his imagination, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Cale turned to him, her expression unreadable. Do you hear that? Ethan froze. His eyes scanned the dark passage behind them. He hadn't heard anything at first, but now that Cale had pointed it out, he couldn't ignore the faint sounds coming from the shadows. Someone's following us, Ethan whispered. Cale nodded, her body tense. We need to move faster. The two of them quickened their pace, their footsteps echoing in the narrow tunnel. The sounds behind them grew louder, closer, and Ethan's heart began to race. It was no longer just a feeling. There was someone or something there, stalking them through the station's corridors. They reached a sealed door at the end of the passage, and Cale immediately set to work on the control panel. Ethan stood watch, his eyes darting back and forth as the footsteps behind them grew louder. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Whatever was following them wasn't friendly. Come on, Ethan urged, his voice low and urgent. We need to get out of here. Cale didn't respond, her attention fixed on the door's security system. Her fingers moved quickly, and the soft glow of her skin illuminated the panel as she worked. Ethan glanced over his shoulder once again, but there was still nothing. The footsteps had stopped, but he knew they weren't alone. Suddenly, Cale cursed under her breath. It's locked!
I need a few more seconds. Ethan reached for his weapon, his heart pounding in his chest.
The silence was broken by a faint sound. Something shifting in the darkness. A shadow moving just out of sight.
Cale, hurry!
Ethan urged. Cale's hand flew over the controls again, and with a soft click, The door finally opened. She stepped aside quickly, motioning for Ethan to go through first. Without hesitation, he moved through the doorway, his weapon raised and ready. They were in a larger maintenance room now, with thick cables and control panels lining the walls. It was a brief respite, but Ethan knew it wouldn't last long. Whatever was hunting them was still out there, and it wasn't going to give up. Kale took a deep breath, her voice steady but low. "We need to find the control room. That's the only way we'll be able to stop this." Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the shadows once again. The station was quiet, but he didn't feel safe. Not yet. "We'll find it," he said, his voice firm, "but we have to stick together, no matter what happens next." The maintenance room was filled with the hum of the station's core systems, but it didn't offer the safety Ethan had hoped for. Kale's glowing fingers traced over the control panels, her focus unshaken. Ethan stood beside her, his weapon raised and ready, his senses heightened as he scanned every corner of the room. The footsteps, the shadows, the feeling of being hunted. It was all too real now. They weren't alone. "Kale, how much longer?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with urgency. Kale's eyes flicked up briefly, a flicker of frustration crossing her face. "I'm almost there. Just a few more seconds." Ethan didn't have the luxury of waiting. His mind raced as he kept glancing back toward the passage they had just entered. It was only a matter of time before whoever, or whatever, was stalking them found their way into the maintenance room. He could almost feel the heavy weight of danger closing in. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. They needed to move fast. The station's systems were compromised, and whatever enemy was hunting them had to be dealt with before it was too late. "You think it's the Varika?" Ethan asked, trying to gather his thoughts. "Another faction from your planet, maybe?" Kale shook her head, her lips tight with concentration. "I don't think so. If they were here, they wouldn't be hiding in the shadows." "We'd know. This is different. Whoever or whatever is after us, it's not from my world." Ethan's gut twisted. The unknown enemy wasn't just dangerous, it was unpredictable. His instincts told him that the situation was deteriorating faster than either of them realized. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed again, louder this time. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. They weren't alone anymore. Whatever had been lurking was now getting closer. "Move!" Ethan barked. Kale didn't need any more prompting. She quickly finished entering the override code on the panel, and with a sharp hiss, the door to the next corridor slid open. Without looking back, she sprinted through, Ethan following closely behind. They entered a long hallway, the walls lined with dark doors leading to various parts of the station. It felt like they were running through a maze, with every turn a new possibility, a new danger. Ethan felt his legs burning from the exertion, but he pushed himself harder. His thoughts kept racing. Why had the station's AI failed them? Why was there no communication from the command center? And most importantly, who was trying to stop them from getting out? These questions gnawed at him, but there was no time to answer them. They had to keep moving. "Where are we headed?" Ethan asked between breaths. "The control room," Kale replied, her voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "It's our best shot." "If we can get there, we can access the station's systems and figure out who's behind all of this." Ethan nodded, not needing further explanation. The control room was at the heart of the station, the place where everything was monitored and controlled. If they could get inside, they would have access to everything. It was their only hope. They reached an intersection in the corridor, and KL stopped suddenly, raising a hand. Ethan followed her lead, instinctively crouching behind a nearby wall. He peered around the corner, and his stomach dropped. A shadow moved in the distance, slowly creeping toward them. The figure was humanoid, but something about its movements was off, unnatural, jerky, almost mechanical. "Do you see that?" Ethan whispered. Kale nodded. It's not human. The figure moved closer, and Ethan could now make out its form in the dim light. It was tall, towering over them, with a strange, sleek body that seemed to shimmer in the shadows. Its face was covered with a mask-like surface, and its eyes glowed with an eerie blue light. The figure moved with precision, each step calculated, as though it knew exactly where to go. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a soldier. This wasn't anyone he had ever encountered before. Kale pulled him back into the shadows, her body tense. We need to be quiet. That thing. It's not something we can fight. Ethan's mind raced. He had been trained to fight, to survive. But this was different. He had no idea what that creature was, but it was clear they couldn't risk engaging it. Not yet. They waited in the dark, watching the figure pass by. It didn't seem to notice them, moving with an unsettling grace. After what felt like an eternity, it was gone. The hallway was silent once more. Kale let out a long breath. That was close. Too close, Ethan muttered, his heart still pounding. He glanced around the corner to ensure the coast was clear, then motioned for Kale to move. They continued down the hallway, the control room just a few more turns away. Every step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the situation pressing on them. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. As they neared the control room, Kale suddenly stopped and raised a hand. Wait. Ethan froze, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Kale's sharp gaze flicked to a panel on the wall near the door. She walked toward it and knelt down, her fingers quickly working over the controls. Ethan stayed alert, watching for any signs of movement. I can bypass the door security system, Kale explained quietly. But we have to be fast. If they realize we're here, they'll lock us out. Ethan nodded, his fingers twitching toward his weapon. He knew they didn't have much time. Kale's fingers flew over the panel, her skin glowing softly as she accessed the station's systems. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he heard a faint sound from down the hall. A soft click, then the echo of footsteps. He turned sharply, his heart racing. They were getting closer. I don't have much time, Kale said, her voice calm but urgent. I need to finish this. The footsteps grew louder, and Ethan knew they had seconds to spare. He stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Hurry, Cal! With a final press of her hand, the panel beeped and the door to the control room slid open with a soft hiss. Without another word, Cal entered first, followed by Ethan, who quickly closed the door behind them. They were inside. The control room was a massive space filled with holographic displays, buttons, and monitors. It was the heart of the station, where every system was controlled and every movement was tracked. Ethan quickly scanned the room, his eyes locking onto the central terminal. Where do we start? He asked, his voice low. Kale moved toward the terminal, her fingers already working over the controls. We start by finding out who's behind this. The station's AI is compromised. Whoever is causing this chaos must be using the system to keep us locked down. I'll trace the signal and see where it's coming from. Ethan nodded and kept his eyes on the door. They weren't safe yet. Not by a long shot. As Kale worked, Ethan kept watch, scanning the room for any sign of movement. The silence was deafening. For a moment, he almost forgot the danger they were in, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Then Kale spoke again. I found the source. It's coming from the deep storage bays. Ethan turned to her, his eyes widening. The deep storage bays? What's down there? Kale looked at him, her expression grave. Ancient alien artifacts. Some of the most dangerous and powerful relics in the galaxy. If someone is using those to control the station, it's a serious threat. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. This was no accident. Someone had planned this, and they were willing to do whatever it took to take control of the station. We need to stop them, Ethan said, his voice resolute.
Before it's too late.
Kale nodded, her eyes flashing with determination. We will. Together. Ethan turned toward the door, his mind already racing with plans and strategies. They had one chance, one opportunity to stop this threat before it spread further. They had come too far to turn back now. Without another word, they both moved toward the door, ready to face whatever awaited them. The real fight was only just beginning.